Good evening, everybody. It's Sunday, about 8:30 p.m. and been a lot going on the last couple of weeks, and wanted to start doing a few of these videos like we used to do back in the day, talking about some of the topics that people are bringing up out there on the campaign trail. So, it's hard to see anybody from either political party just, saying things very simply so people understand it. They always want to try to confuse the matters. But before I talk about the CDC and the vaccination stuff, I just wanted to say in general that if you have any time right now in the next couple of weeks, we could really use some help across the state with canvassing, doing a little bit of door knocking just in your neighborhood where you live. We've got a friends and family flyer. It's a one-page thing that you could print out there. And if you just have time to just go see 20, 30 of your neighbors right there in the neighborhood and kind of give them our information, we'd really appreciate it. It'll help out significantly. JB Pritzker's spending $150 million and he's helping the other statewide candidates to try to spread their disinformation, let's call it. And we just really could appreciate your help if you could do that. So if you have any time, again, just to any time in the next couple of weeks to do a couple of door knocks in your community, if you could send an email to Ryan at info@tomdevore.com. That's info@tomdevore.com. Or Ryan just posted something up there, some kind of link as well. So again, if you could do that for us, I'll be mentioning that during the beginning of these videos over the next week or two, but it could change the whole outcome and the whole course of this election. So thank you. The vaccination stuff has kind of come back up on the campaign because the CDC, as you guys are aware, just made this recommendation for the COVID vaccine to be for the schools. I'll talk about the details of that in a second. But before I do, I think it's important to point out that, Governor Pritzker now has issued 34 disaster proclamations in a row. Almost his whole term, he's been trying to rule by executive fiat. It's absolutely astonishing that happens, and yet our legislature sits idly by and allows it to happen. So he's still issuing the executive orders about various topics. And then, I don't give my opinion to you guys much. It's just usually not my style. But I firmly believe that he's just waiting for this election to be over. And if he gets reelected, he's going to see that as a ratification and an approval by the people of our state for all of these things that he's been doing. And he's going to get right back to business with the vaccines and the mandates and the masking. He's going to try to start all over again because he will be emboldened. I believe that to be true. You may not. That's okay. But that's what we're going to talk about. So the issue with vaccinations, it's a hot topic, especially the last couple of years with this COVID vaccine and the vaccines for children specifically. So in Illinois, of course, as you guys have always heard me talk to you now and I'll look over a little bit at the screen looking at questions as we go. But as I've always told you, if your government is telling you to do something or not to do something, it's always written in the law someplace, okay? So we're going to talk about the law in Illinois as it relates to vaccinations for children. Very specifically, because if the CDC, the federal agency, makes a recommendation, it's just that, a recommendation. It doesn't have any binding effect on you as citizens of Illinois at all. But what you've seen over the last couple of years is when the CDC makes a recommendation, then the Illinois government at some level, whether it's the governor himself or some agency, says, oh, we're just doing what the CDC recommends. That's all we're doing. And then the CDC says, well, we're just recommending. And it goes in a circle. So as to vaccinations of children, there is a law, okay, in Illinois. It's in the Illinois School Code. It's in the Illinois School Code. And these documents that we have here, Ryan's going to have up on our website along with this video after this is all over. So anybody after the fact can go to our website and they can pull this video and this information, okay? Sorry, it's Sunday night. It's been a long week. I got just a small glass of wine. So under the Illinois School Code, which you'll see is 105 ILCS, this is 5-27-8.1. And under subpart 3, Ryan has it right here. He's going to highlight it for you, okay? And your Illinois legislature a long time ago said that children do have to have certain immunizations to prevent communicable diseases. And you see where it says there, as the Department of Health shall require by rules and regulations. So your legislature has said in Illinois that your child, in order to be in the public school, shall have certain immunizations as required by the Department of Health by rules and regulations. And rules and regulations are specific, and we'll get to that in a second. Now, of course, you will find that there's always, because it's required under our Constitution, that there are medical and religious exemptions. There can always be a medical or religious exemption for these types of things. But the issue is you have to apply for it. You have to, get it, etc. And you can get into disputes with your school. And some of you probably saw it with your employers as well, because it's kind of similar, of whether you qualify for that religious or medical exemption. But before you talk about exemptions, the question becomes is what can your government require of you and your children? So this particular provision of the law, whether you like it or not, was passed by your legislature that says at certain times during when the school year's starting, I'll get to in a second, your child has to have certain immunizations as required by the Department of Health. So drop down to part 5, Ryan. You'll see here now, this part of it talks about, well, what happens? Okay, so along with your immunizations, you also have health exams, but we're not talking about health exams. By October 15th, a parent has to provide to the school district proof of the immunizations that are required by the Department of Health. We'll get to that in a second. And if you don't provide that proof of immunization and aren't otherwise exempt for medical or religious reasons, what happens? Scroll down a little bit, Ryan. Go down a little bit. Right, stop there. Go back up just a little bit. It says in there that if a child does not comply by October 15th or by the earlier date, doesn't matter, then the local school authority shall exclude the child from the school until such time as they present the proof. So what that's saying is this is one of the very limited circumstances to where your legislature has authorized your local school board to exclude your child from school if they have not complied with these vaccination requirements or otherwise been exempt. And I had a parent reach out to me, and I was busy, but I kind of answered them about how their child was being excluded from school because they hadn't received some vaccinations and they didn't have an exemption. And I just, real quickly, I'm not, even have many clients right now, but I told her you can do that, right? Because the legislature has adopted it. So the Illinois School Code says that you have to have certain vaccinations unless you have an exemption. What vaccinations are required or come from the Department of Health. We'll get to that in a second. And if you don't have those vaccinations or otherwise have a religious or medical exemption, your child can be excluded from the school and not allowed to return. Okay? If you don't like that, my response to you is that you have to deal with that with your House of Representative or your senator and get the law changed. But that's the law. It's been the law for a long, long time. So now the question becomes, well, what vaccinations are required? And you remember when it said, go back up to number 3, Ryan. Oh, you went too far, my friend. Right there. You see where it says, as the Department of Public Health shall require by rule. So the Department of Public Health, as I've explained to you guys in the past, is an administrative agency. And that administrative agency is overseen by the governor. The governor appoints the director of the Department of Health. And then the Department of Health does certain things by rule and regulation. They pass rules. So there is a rule in the administrative code for the Department of Health that deals with vaccinations for your children. Go to the next one, Ryan. Next slide. This is at the very top. You see where it says Title 77? Title 77 of the Administrative Code is for the Illinois Department of Public Health. These are the rules and regulations of that administrative agency, and it lays out the things that they've adopted, which is, again, lawfully appropriate, because your legislature has given them the ability to do these things. So if you scroll to subpart B, Ryan, so we can see the whole thing there. Under subpart B, it deals with health examinations and includes the immunizations. You see there, Ryan blew it up a little bit. So within the administrative code, they have adopted rules that deal with what immunizations are required for your children, again, and I'll repeat it over and over, unless they have a valid exemption for medical or religious reasons. So under the next section that we're going to click on the next tab, Ryan. Under 665.240, go back again, Ryan. You see where it says 240 there? That's one of the provisions under subpart B that deals with immunizations. What immunizations are required? Now go back. Here under subpart A, it lists all of those vaccinations that the Department of Health has adopted a rule that says that your children are required to take before they enter the public school. And you can see there's about 12 of them if you scroll down a little bit, Ryan. Okay, there's about 12. And then if you continue to go down in this section, you can go look at it, or we'll have it on our website. It lays out some procedures of when exactly each of these particular types of vaccinations are taken, etc. And as Ryan scrolls down, you can see each of those 12 categories, they give you more details. But these rule, this particular part of the rule that we're talking about, is how the Department of Health has established which vaccinations that the school board is required to make sure that you're taken. So the Department of Health and the State Board of Education do work together on this particular issue, because those 12 vaccinations are the vaccinations that the Department of Health has established. Now, the question you want to know, the COVID vaccine. If there was ever going to be an attempt to add the COVID vaccine as an additional required vaccination for your children, the Department of Health would have to propose in a rule to add it as number 13, okay? There's a whole process that they have to go through to try to get that added. To my knowledge, that hasn't started yet, but you'll have to, as parents, constantly monitor the Department of Health to see if they propose a new rule adding the COVID vaccine, because that's the mechanism, the legal mechanism of how that would have to happen. And once that process would be started by the Department of Health, there's a whole public comment period and et cetera, and it goes through the oversight committee of JCAR. You guys remember all of that stuff, before it would then be added as an additional vaccination. Whether or not that's ever going to happen, I don't know. I just wanted you to understand that if it was ever going to be added, this is the procedure of how they would have to add it. And I've always told you before, I don't ever talk about who people might vote for or don't vote for, but this is one of those very rare occasions you're going to get Tom's thoughts. Remember when I told you that the director of the Department of Health is appointed by your governor? So whoever your governor is appoints that position. If Governor Pritzker is reelected and he continues with his current Department of Public Health director, they could start that process of adding the COVID vaccine as an additional vaccination for your children to take, and that would procedurally be the way they would have to do it. So that's something you might consider when you choose to vote this November 8th. If you were to vote for Darren Bailey, then Darren gets to pick who his director of the Department of Health is, and who he picks would have significant control over whether they would present a rule to add the COVID vaccine as an additional requirement for your children. You see where I'm going with that? That's why it's very important for you to pay attention to these types of issues, because that's how it would have to work. The governor, whichever one it is, has significant influence over ultimately what will happen with this COVID vaccine requirement for children. Just merely because the CDC recommended it just gives what I believe to be political fodder for Governor Pritzker to try to push through a rule change to the Department of Public Health adding the COVID vaccine, because he would get on TV and tell all of you, we're just following the CDC guidance and the recommendation of the CDC, right? We don't have to follow the recommendation of the CDC. And many times over the last couple of years, the governor never followed the recommendations when he didn't like it. He just did whatever he wanted. So Illinois is under no obligation whatsoever to pay any attention to the CDC's recommendation. We can do as a people what we feel is best. And so we need to pay particular attention to who our governor is going to be after November 8th, because that could wield significant influence over whether or not they try to put this COVID vaccine as an additional requirement within the Department of Health, which then your school district would be obligated by law to follow. So if you notice what I've just talked about, none of it's been about the governor wielding unlawful authority or exceeding his authority, etc. That's not for this conversation. This conversation is about legitimate political differences of making sure that you vote for somebody that coincides with your beliefs. Because if Governor Pritzker gets reelected and he directs his Department of Health director to propose a new rule to the administrative code to add COVID, procedurally, that's appropriate. There's no unlawful process there. And if that makes it through that procedural oversight and becomes an actual rule, it's going to get added as a requirement. And then every parent in this state who doesn't want their child to have that vaccine is going to be in a position to try to get a religious or a medical exemption, or pull them out of school and homeschool them, or do something else other than the public school, because the public school, your local school board, would be obligated to actually follow that rule if it was appropriately and procedurally adopted. That's what I wanted you guys to understand, okay? Let me look real quick and see if there's any questions, but I wanted just to give you the quick, it's 18-minute explanation, but it's very important that you understand that. I don't think good. There wasn't a lot of questions. That's awesome. So that's the explanation. I appreciate you guys taking a chance to listen. If you've got time, again, in your area of the state, email the campaign at info@tomdevore.com, and Ryan can send you the copy of the flyer that we have. Walk your neighborhood where you live, pass it out. 10, 20, 30 people could make a huge, huge difference in these elections, because, again, we don't need Governor Pritzker back. We don't need Kwame Raoul back. We don't need any of these people back, because it's not going to go well for us if they get reelected. God bless you. Have a good evening.